Okay, we're ready? Okay, the ones. What's the seed thought? Genesis 2:22. Dana said, I got the easy one.
Made a woman from the rib of man.
Yep. Creation of woman. Go back to Genesis 2. He created them male and female. Okay. There's a verse right now that's about as culturally relevant as you can possibly get right now. Number 2. Anybody else in number 1? Different way you'd say it? I'd probably say something like, while everyone around you is screaming that gender doesn't matter, maybe it does. Gender matters. Leviticus 18. The 2s. You got the fun one. What do you got? See.
There are sexual relationships that are abomination and perversion to God. So there's the right way that God has, and there are what is against that.
Yeah. And the people that I respect the most that are dealing with this whole thing of same-sex attraction will say, church, stop. You do not quote the word abomination. Because you've, one person called it a belief defeater. When we start right off with, oh, well, you know where you are is an abomination to God, right? Okay, end of discussion. There is no more conversation. So I like there's a right design, there's a purpose, and there are things that this is saying they're not good for you. They're out of bounds, which begs the question, why? Any other 2s, ways you'd say it?
I would just say all forms of sex outside of marriage are, like you said, against God's design, and so therefore sinful. So it doesn't matter if it's homosexuality or just adultery or any of those things. They're all equally.
And I think my counseling with people, I've been camping there, and I'd invite you to think about it the same way. Sexual brokenness is sexual brokenness is sexual brokenness. And the quicker, my experience has been, the more we move away from this is some special category, the more we're on common ground to talk about grace and the gospel and what one author calls, and I'll tell you about his CDs in a minute, but he says God's good creational intent. He takes these 6 passages and says, this is God's good. He's not killjoy. He's not trying to, it's not prudish. Good creational intent for our good. His intent from creation, what is it? Leviticus 20, number 3. What's the seed thought?
I think you're going up to verse 13, not 12.
Oh, probably.
But
Sorry.
because 12 is about the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law. But I think 13 is just that it's unnatural.
Yeah.
It's unnatural.
It's another word we could use for unnatural. Yeah, I don't like that. Not the way we were designed, not the way we were created. For all the conversation about homosexuality and same-sex attractions over the last few years, I still have yet. Have you heard anybody talk about how girls have sexual relations together or how guys have sexual relations together? Never heard anybody talk about it, write about it, address it. That says something to us. Fourth, Romans 1. What's a seed truth? Some of you number 4s.
Let's start at verse 5. They
exchange the truth of God for a lie. That we made our priority the priority instead of God's priority. Because of that, we changed the view of things.
Yep.
That was not a siege. That was too long to be a siege.
Oh, that's good. Other fours, what would you say?
So we're worshiping created things.
Yeah. That's good. Worshipping created things. There is a tie between our sexuality and our worship. Turn to Romans 1. And that's another spot for us to camp, and we'll get there in a minute. Anybody else want to say anything on that? How about number 5, 1 Corinthians 6? Yeah, Chris.
That it's immoral. Again, to reiterate what he said, all relationships, sexual relationships outside of marriage are not God's intent. And that's exactly what this verse is talking about. And it's lumped in with other sins that aren't necessarily sexual or immoral.
I'd say that in those verses, no matter what sin you're in, you can be justified by that.
That's good. Yeah. And we'll come back to this passage in a minute because I think it's one of the most important ones for all of us in terms of interacting with students and young adults. 1 Timothy 1.
So it's saying that the purpose for God's law is not for everybody who has it together, but for those who don't. And it doesn't just quantify, those who struggle with sexual sin, but there's several things there. A lot of times with Christians like that, we have sin which is bad, and then homosexuality which is worse. So we put them in their own little box. It's a special person time for them. So this one is just kind of saying that this is that God's law, the purpose for God's law is for those who don't have it together. All who don't have it together.
I just said laws are meant to help sinners, and we're all sinners.
There you go. That's good.
I was going to say also that God's law is not so that we might become righteous, but that it would point us to Christ, find our righteousness in Him.
Yeah. I think there's something really good about being able to say we're all broken. We're going to pray in a second. The reason that this first came onto my horizon, Christy and I were in, I think, our 3rd year as youth leaders in Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, and a couple that were youth sponsors with us and part of our leadership family. Good friends. They were our next door neighbors. Best friends. He started pulling back away, got real involved in his job. He started being very concerned about what he wore, dyed his hair. I went away to a National Youth Conference, and I came back, and the first day I'm back, my boss, the pastor, comes in and plops down in the chair across from me and says, let's talk about your friend. I said, what's he into? He said, well, I said, it's another woman, isn't it? Because I thought, sure, he was into what he looked like because he was in the midst of an affair. He said, I wish it was. This was 1980, 81, something like that. I knew zero about same-sex attraction, homosexuality. The whole thing was just kind of gross to me. Never an issue for me, so I didn't think about it until somebody I loved was right in the thick of it. And then I thought, I got to learn something. And at that point, I could find 2 books. One was by Gingrich, one was by LaHaye. there was like, I'll tell you the story over supper if you want to hear it, about my trip one night. We got involved with both the couple. The wife wanted to keep the marriage together and work at things, and he bailed, said, nope, moving into a gay community in Georgetown. So we moved down to D.C. And this was pre-AIDS. This was scary. One of my most interesting nights, they had a big fight. She would call us and say, would you come over? He says he's going to leave. Went over and talked to him, and he said, I'm going into the gay bar. They understand me there. I said, okay, I'm going with you. He looked at me. It was like, he looked at me and said, you'd get sick. I said, fine, I'll go out back, puke, and I'll come right back in and be there with you. It was one of the most interesting nights of my ministry ever. Can tell you more about that later. He's still alive. AIDS hasn't taken him, as far as I know. Every time I go back to Pennsylvania, I ask questions about him. Very, very sad. Turned away from Jesus, and is in that. I'll tell you later the one thing that made him stop and think of everything, if you remind me. Let's pray. We want to, Father, have your mind and heart for people who are struggling with brokenness and sexuality. And we're all there on the spectrum, all needing your grace, all needing your forgiveness. Help us as we deal with a part of our culture that is grabbing so much time and attention and energy right now, and is seen at total odds with the scriptures or being a follower of Jesus. And we know we've got students and young adults who are battling and wrestling and trying to determine how to move forward. We want to be able to come alongside them and help. Please use these moments to equip us for that purpose. We pray in your name. Amen. Top of the sheet has 3 keys in our hearts: humility, charity, and community. Tell you a story, another story. This gal was, from the time she can remember, she wanted to be a boy. Tomboy, ultimate girl tomboy. Star in the youth group. What you would consider one of your best kids, kept the whole thing secret. Just wasn't into makeup and the girly stuff, but she was, one of the, what you would consider stellar, really loves Jesus, wants to serve. She goes away to college, gets involved with the campus ministry there. She's one of their leaders as well, but she's in crisis because of what's going on internally in terms of same-sex attraction versus what she knows the Bible teaches. She goes away to a conference that is, I think this was either a Cru or InterVarsity conference, and they're there, and she decides she's got to tell the leader of the campus ministry. She's scared to do it, goes back to her room that night. She's up on the 12th floor, something like that. She's ready to jump out the window and just end. That's how bad the struggle had gotten for her. She decides instead she's going to take the chance to tell her ministry leader. She assumes it's going to mean that she's removed from leadership and she's out of the ministry, and so she tells him, I'm gay. The youngest memories I have are same-sex attraction. And he says, okay, we're going to figure out how to go to God with this and work through it together. She was blown away because she got community instead of rejection. She was blown away because he showed compassion instead of judgment. It wasn't soft. It was not, oh, well, that's fine if that's who you are. But it was, we're going to figure this out. She is now involved. She's 37 years old, says, I'm just now getting to where I'm entertaining the thought of being married to a guy. There's some attraction coming. Had no reparative therapy. She just shifted into, I'm going to live celibate, despite my desires, and submit myself to Jesus. And she's been involved in campus ministry at Purdue for that whole time since she was a student. third page of your outline has the link to her story. The reason I share that and put it here, her name is Linda Seiler. My wife is my research assistant. She's awesome. She listens to Focus on the Family and James McDonald and several things. And when there's a good story or a message, she says, Bruce, I think you want to listen to this one. And her story, the link is there. It's awesome. And point 5 under E, Linda, this is page 2 of your outline. Did I say page 3? Yeah. I'm sorry. Page 2 at the bottom. Linda Seiler. You can find her website. She speaks all over the country now, but still is involved in campus ministry at Purdue. And her talk was Becoming the Woman God Made Me to Be. Her quote was, "It would have been the most unloving to reinforce my brokenness and rob me of the redemptive power of the cross." In other words, if another believer had said, "Oh, that's all right, if that's the way God made you, that's the way it is," and had not come alongside her to walk through the truth of the passages, the 6 that we just talked about, and say, okay, so what does God want you to do with this? Does he have something to say about it? I love her expression. It would have been most unloving. See, we're told if you're loving, you're tolerant, and you aren't going to take a stand on anything biblically. That puts us in quite a spot, doesn't it? So we're going to talk about that for the sake of the Lindas that you will interact with. That was a great example of community, compassion, love being shown, and humility, as opposed to these people are an abomination. That whole AIDS crisis came. AIDS exists because God's finally judging homosexuality. And when AIDS started, that's what was said in the 90s by the church. The church. Well-meaning people that wanted to stick with the scriptures. But where's that going to get us? Saying it's God's judgment. So basic Bible beliefs, or basic beliefs to begin with. Number one, what do the scriptures say? For our church, when DOMA was struck down, Defense of Marriage Act, and that we're moving a year later became gay marriage is fine, constitutional right to it. I said to our church family, before you talk about it at the water cooler, before you state your opinion about what God says about it, do you know what the 6 passages are, and can you speak about them intelligently? Because we really don't have anything to say other than where I started. Oh, it seems just kind of gross and I don't know anything about it. That's all we got until we go to the six passages and say, okay, what does God have to say about it? Another basic belief, 3 strands of sexual identity. So I am indebted to Mark Yarhouse. There's a joke at our church that when we have a tough topic when we're preaching, that they give it to me. We laugh about it a lot on the team. So we were going through Ephesians, and I got a message on sexuality have nothing to do with sexual immorality. And so I happened to be reading that summer Yarhouse, Homosexuality and the Christian. If you don't have this, you need it. If you, as a youth leader, I'm leaving these up here so you can take pictures of them. Go order them used on Amazon. Spend just a couple of bucks. But they'll be there. This is the one that's written for you. Are you familiar with this at all? Yarhouse runs the Institute for the Study of Sexual Identity at Regents University in Virginia Beach. He's the most respected within the psychological community, most respected Christian who has taken biblical convictions and the research and spoken about gender dysphoria, same-sex attraction, and the whole issue of even fluidity now he's talking about. So this is written for youth leaders on how do I walk with my students through this. So a few things I'm saying today I've stolen from him. Here's the basic belief. That today, particularly the those endorsing and trying to get more and more influence with the gay community, they want to make your sexual identity unistrand. And what we need to do with people is help them think through its 3 strands of sexual identity. You have your attractions, you have your behavior, and you have your identity. So, I say it like this. I love my wife. I'm attracted to my wife. Guess what? I'm attracted to other women. Any guy has to control his thought life, right? More an issue for us men than you women. And sometimes you go, what is he thinking? So I'm attracted to another woman. Oh, there's an attraction there. Do I have to act on that attraction with my behavior? Do I have to linger with the look? Nope. Should I? No. Not if I'm a one-woman man and want to live out my commitment to love her. Attraction is not the same as I have to act on the attraction. We never say that heterosexually. Why do we say it homosexually? Well, I have the attractions that I need to be true to myself and act on my attractions. And, oh, by the way, that's my identity. So what's happening is that young students are dealing with what has forever been there. There's a homosexual curiosity or a thought, and most of the time it goes and it leaves. Once in a while it comes and it lingers and stays. Well, the quicker you can, if you're in favor of homosexuality, gay marriage, any of the dissolve male and female distinctions. We want to get rid of binary gender. If that's where you are, you want one strand. Oh, you're attracted? That means this is who you are. And Yarhouse has wisely said, that's not true in human development. That's not true in counseling. We would never say it about, oh, well, I have an urge to do something, therefore I have to do it, and that's who I am. In heterosexuality, we say, oh, I'm attracted to another woman. Oh, I have to have sex with her. Oh, that means I'm a sex addict or a philanderer. We never go, oh, yeah, too bad. Guess that's the way you're made. We'd say, you have some volition there and get to choose what to do with it. But it's different. So 3 strands of identity, I think that's very, very important. So you got a student that goes, I'm wrestling with the same-sex attraction thing, or I think maybe what's going on inside me? Good, let's talk about it. Attractions are there. What have you done with that behavior-wise yet? Okay, what do you think this means? So that 3 strands is really important. Third belief, sin is sin. There's no separate section of hell for those acting out on same-sex attraction. Text supports experimentation. What that means is kids, as you know, can do anything on their phones and find anything on their phones, and there's no accountability. Everything is normalized now. So you want to do the search for the regular porn site, go for it. You want to search for 2 guys doing stuff together, 2 girls doing stuff together, search for it. It's semi-anonymous, neutral, only my best friend will know, or I can tell no one. And so this whole thing of experimentation and research, and what 20 years ago was a thought and you dismiss it, now becomes a thought and a curiosity, and well, let me check it out on my phone, or let me ask somebody else about it. And it's in the news all the time, so it's changed. 6th, we have theology, they have story. So one of your resource persons, back on page 2, names to know, we're going to jump down to number 6, names to know and stories to hear. Because I'm going to fly through things here to beat my alarm, and then we're going to talk about it. Names to know, stories to hear. You need to listen to Rosaria Butterfield. Have you heard of her? Yes. Have you heard her speak? Yes. You got to go online. You got to listen to her. Nick's wife, Athena, loves Rosaria. She went down The Association for Christian Biblical Counselors, ACBC, had their national conference at Louisville 2 falls ago, and their theme was all on sexuality and gender. And Rosario was there speaking. You can find some of them on YouTube, some of their presentations, and her talk, her testimony. Lesbian atheist, that then, and she's written a book called
The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert.
Yep. The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Athena's told me about it, said you got to read it. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But Butterfield's a name you need to know. Christopher Yuan is a name you need to know. I was dealing with a guy, he's had a string for years of homosexual affairs. Gets caught by his wife. A few years go by, falls into another one. A few years go by, falls into another one. I'm talking to the two of them, and I say, now, have you guys listened to, do you know Christopher Yuan's story? And they both look at me like I'm speaking Martian. They'd never heard of him. Neither of them, including the offended wife, neither of them have ever done any research on the issue to hear any stories of anybody that has seen God work in their heart to restore their broken sexuality. So, Sam here is a British pastor. There's a small group of British rectors, I think that's the right name, in the Episcopal Church, who, while most of the Anglican Church in England, most of the churches said, oh, it's fine, we'll ordain gay people. These guys have said, we understand the Bible says no, and yet we are same-sex attracted men. What do? We aren't going the route of the Catholic Church. Let's abuse kids with our desires. We're going to take seriously God's call to purity. Given my desires and my wiring, what does that purity look like? And Sam has started speaking, and same thing, you can find him. Need to know his story. I gave you a couple of links. Christopher is that way. Was going to be a dentist, became a drug dealer, went to prison, heard the gospel. The prison chaplain said, oh, that's all right. You want to be a follower of Jesus and be gay? That's fine. And Christopher said, but I read my Bible and I knew he was wrong. I had to choose. And so he's chosen. He's an adjunct prophet, Moody Bible Institute, pastors a church, speaks. And he's written a book, he and his mother. And basically he said, God's called me to celibacy because he hasn't changed my desires. So it doesn't matter whether you're straight, gay, fluid, whatever you are, he's called us to submit our sexuality to him. He has a plan for it. So I'm going to submit my sexuality to him. Awesome story. So Sam's point is they have stories. They meaning the gay lobby or folks that are saying, you're uncompassionate, you don't understand it. They have stories of people loving them as they are. And said, Christians don't tell stories. Where have you seen God work? So I wanted you to have those. You're dealing with a student. I think it's important for them to hear, yeah, there's somebody who has had same-sex attraction as long as they can remember and has said, but I'm choosing to follow Jesus with this until he changes it. And he might never. That is something that will give great hope to a student that is wrestling with this. Back to page 1. Number 3, staying on the path of faith. This is really helpful also from Yarhouse. Okay, so maybe I should have put this under basic beliefs. He says there's a big difference between the person, he calls it in his first book, the assertive advocate is the person, I'm same-sex attracted, whether they include I'm a follower of Jesus or not, I'm same-sex attracted and you can't tell me that's wrong, and so you're just a bigoted homophobe. Assertive advocate. They're advocating for their homosexuality, and how dare you challenge it. Big difference from that and the sensitive struggler. I've got these attractions, urges, thoughts. What do I do with it? And Yarhouse's point is, if you've got an assertive advocate, the idea of trying to fight or argue or deal with the 6 passages or convince them, you're probably not going to get anywhere, and you're not gaining any points for Jesus in the process. Love the person. I'm ready to talk with you about the big question that I'll say in just a minute. This speaks really wisely about the strugglers. And I'm going to say that every adolescent is a struggler. They don't have enough life experience yet to be an assertive advocate and say, at 16, I know who I am and what I'm going to be. No, you don't. Now, you have to say that with compassion, love. Wait a minute. Let's talk about it. And so he wisely says, and this is our our adult ministries pastor, Tim Wright, says, stay on the path. He and Nick last year did a great series with our students on sexuality and said, okay, you're trying to sort things out. You got questions, you got urges. You're wondering, stay on the path of faith. It isn't, I chuck my faith while I sort out my sexuality, and then I decide if I'm coming back. It's, no, I walk with, I want to follow Jesus, but I got questions, and I don't know what to do with this part of me. Stay on the path, and so the point for us is get on the path with him. So it's okay, let's talk about your question, but we're moving toward Jesus as we wrestle, the sensitive struggler, as opposed to, I'm just going to shelve this. I think that's a really important distinction. Fourth, being able to engage and answer biblically questions about desires. A couple of things that, and then we're going to go to 1 Corinthians 6 together. What's the opposite of homosexuality? Holiness. Yeah. And I think it's a very helpful thing for us. Opposite is hetero, homo, doesn't matter. God's after our holiness. And so to pit homo versus hetero isn't really the agenda spiritually. But when it comes to what does God want to do in them. The idea of desire. So, Genesis 3, what happens in the garden?
Satan asks Eve a couple questions.
Yep. And he starts with, what's his first question?
Did God really say?
Did God really say? Doubt. Then what comes? She sees that it looks good. So you got, he starts first with the deceit, then doubt, then desire. We're in a culture right now that, I was going to start this by saying, are desires inviolable? It's wrong to violate them. I can't go against my feelings. Nick, what was your comment 2 weeks ago? You said something about, when we were talking about depression and suicide, we'll get to it, but yeah, we got students now that if I'm bored or unhappy, it makes sense to take my life. Bored or unhappy. Because feelings rule the day. I've got to be authentic. I've got to be true to my feelings. And no area in life is that more important right now, including for an adolescent, than sexuality. Got to be true to my feelings. Well, that all of a sudden puts the desires top of the heap. And so until we can get at helping biblically to work back up the bus on desire instead of, I got these desires, so I have to be true to them. Back up the bus. Where's the desire come from in the first place? And I like one person said, all of our hearts are like the rest of our hearts. All of our hearts, oh, my alarm. All of our hearts are like the rest of our hearts, meaning there's no temptation except what is common to man. I'll hurry and then maybe come. So we've got to be able to talk about where do desires come from, a theology of desire. I believe it's good for me, so it becomes a desire, and then I act to get it. Our core beliefs about what is best for us come out as our orientation. Okay, let that one soak in a minute. Our core beliefs about what we believe is best for us come out as our orientation. So a little skepticism, a little healthy doubt is to say, can I really trust my desires? Should Eve have trusted her desires? Nope. 3, are my desires trustworthy? Are they irresistible? I used the word inviolable in that one as well. The purpose of my body and sexuality. So back to 1 Corinthians 6. 2 passages I want. I think these 3 that are under B, top of page 2. 1 Corinthians 6 says, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. The notion that my body, context here is my sexuality, belongs to God. I am not my own. I don't own myself anymore. He goes on the rest of his argument, but does it make any sense for a part of the body of Christ to join himself with a prostitute? Remember, Corinth is Acrocorinth, temple to Aphrodite, male and female temple prostitutes. You worship by going up and having sex up there with whoever you felt like that day. And so to them, he's saying, wait a minute, your body belongs to somebody. Flee all the immorality because there's a purpose for your sexuality. Oh, it's not just about fulfilling my desires. So 1 Corinthians 6, really important passage. I like what Jocelyn Wallace does with 2 Corinthians 4 and 5. It's the passage I use at funerals all the time. End of chapter 4. These light and momentary trials are not worth comparing to the glory to be revealed. That's a death passage, right? What if that applies to desires I have to say no to? These light and momentary troubles are not worth being compared to what God has in store. So we fix our eyes on not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, not on the temporal, but what's eternal, and then goes into, and meanwhile, when the earthly tent is being pulled down, we have a heavenly dwelling being prepared by God. In the meantime, we groan. And Jocelyn says, where did it go that, can we get back to saying, yeah, there's crud that goes on in us that's supposed to make us go, I can't wait for God to get me out of this mess. Where I am more focused on what he has in the long term than I want to fulfill what I feel right now. And so there's a spirit behind 2 Corinthians 4 and 5 that I think we call the struggler to. Yeah, this is a struggle. But this isn't all of life. This isn't all of your purpose. Lift your eyes up. Look longer term. And every one of these people, like Sam Mulberry, Jackie Hill Perry's been at Youth Conference at Momentum twice now. At least Christopher Yuan, Rosaria Butterfield. These are all people that have said there is something that matters more than the fulfillment of my desires and attractions right now. That tells us something. Genesis 2, the reason in the 6 passages created male and female, Dana said, this is really basic. And in an era where Satan's doing his best to sweep away anything about gender, did God have a purpose or not? If it's true that who he is most fully revealed in male and female, he created them. In the image of God, he created them. If that's true, then what happens when we wipe maleness out and femaleness out? And who stands to gain by doing that? So that's why Satan's listed next. Role in sexuality. Why would he be eager to destroy or distort sex and gender? He's always been about stealing, killing, destroying. And if he can get the church scared into silence, oh, you're so intolerant. That's why where we started page 1, compassion, community, charity, love, huge. Then the big question, and this is what Tim and Nick did a really good job with our students last year. D, does God know what he's talking about? Does he have the right to define and direct my sexuality? Because bottom line, Yarhouse's point, keep them on the path of faith. That's the question that every student, every young adult has to answer. Either God knows it is his good creational intent. Either I say he knows what's good for me. Stay committed to my wife and don't let any thought of another woman linger in my mind. He either knows what's good for me and he has a purpose for it and I trust it, or I say, eh. And ultimately for any young adult, that's the watershed. Does God know what he's talking about? His creator? Should we listen to it? Yeah, we wrestle. You got questions. You got attractions. 30 years ago it was, why wait? Now it's trendy to go, well, maybe I'm fluid. And for a student who's 16 years old and wrestling and struggling with these mixed emotions, we got to walk the path and keep them on the path, not go, eee. Well, when you get that figured out, come back and we'll talk some more about Jesus. The church can't do that anymore. And restoring wonder, what I mean by that is Ephesians 5, the glory of marriage, Proverbs 5. The reason he's telling his son, stay away from the wayward woman, and he celebrates sexuality in marriage in Proverbs 5. Talk about sex. Talk about sexuality. We want our students that are wrestling with SSA and our students that are straight, we want them to have a sense of wonder at what God created and is going to call most of them to. Some will call them to singleness. Some will call to celibacy. But the sense of wonder. Then, I'll shut up in a sec. Be careful about labels. That's back to 3 strands. Behavior does not equal identity. Oh, you're gay. Yarhouse writes about the difference between a student who will say, I'm gay, capital G. They've made it their identity. And gay, small g, I'm wrestling with attractions. So labels, really important. Peers are going to push them to label themselves. You want to hit the brakes and slow that whole thing down. The gospel and the role of the church. The gospel is transformative. Does God change the desires of everyone who has same-sex attraction? Not that I can tell. Not yet, not in the timetable I'd like. It's an interesting school of thought right now that when Jesus answers the disciples about marriage and that it's once for life, and they say, oh man, if that's the way it is, then maybe people shouldn't marriage. And he answers them that some are born eunuchs, some, this isn't for everybody, but some are born eunuchs and some are made eunuchs. That there's a school of thought now that the whole same-sex attraction and homosexuality, that's what he was referring to. It's a made eunuch. will choose to submit their sexuality to Jesus because there's no righteous way to act on their attractions with God's good creational intent. Confidentiality. I asked Athene about this. When do you have the conversation with the parents when a student's talking to you and saying, I'm wrestling with this? Do you go to the parents right away? Do you not go to the parents right away? Rule of thumb, set a deadline for them. They love you. You don't walk this path alone. Isolation is typically used by the devil, not by the Lord. So you don't want them left alone. Good to say, you can tell your parents. I'll go with you to tell your parents. But let's make sure we do it by, I'll see you next Wednesday night. Gives you 3 days. I'm going to pray. You decide how you want to do that. I'll go talk with them. Because typically leaving the parents in the dark is not wise. Lots of questions about reparative therapy. Does it work? Exodus International closed because of all kinds of scandals with it and said, yeah, there's really no good science to back up reparative therapy. Every one of these testimony people would say it's just God's work and they're yielding to what the Holy Spirit's convicting them about. It's not that they went through a bunch of therapy to reshape their desires. And then the questions and answers is simply, that's a good list. That's stolen from, I can't remember who, and is good questions to, it's stolen from Brent Oakwin from Lafayette, Indiana, Biblical Counseling Church, where he says these are good questions to work through with young adults. He had his nephew come to him, and he was the first person his nephew told what was going on with him. College age, young adult. When he knew what his uncle thought biblically about it, but his uncle was, that's why he talks about community and love. This nephew comes to him and says, I know what you think about this, but here's where I am. And he's walking the path with him.